Nathan Cole had always considered his marriage to Rebecca solid, even enviable. They had shared 10 years of life together in Charleston, South Carolina, a place where charm and tradition flowed as naturally as the tides. But in the last few months, something had shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, just small cracks in the facade. Nathan had chalked it up to stress from Rebecca's job in marketing, or maybe the pressures of maintaining their meticulously restored historic home. But now, those cracks felt more like chasms. One evening, as Nathan sat at their worn oak dining table, the faint sound of Rebecca's laughter drifted down the hall. She was on the phone again, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when he approached. She'd been doing that a lot lately. His heart clenched, not from jealousy, but from a gnawing sense of exclusion. It was as if he were living in the same house with a stranger. "Who was that?" he asked casually, though the weight behind his question was anything but. Rebecca smiled, a tight, practiced expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just Chloe. She's going through some things." Nathan nodded, pretending to believe her. He wanted to, desperately. But that night, as he lay awake in bed while Rebecca scrolled endlessly on her phone beside him, he couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe wasn't the one she'd been laughing with. The next day, Nathan's suspicions deepened. Rebecca had left her bag on the kitchen counter, a rare lapse for someone so meticulous. As he reached for his car keys, a flash of light from inside her bag caught his eye. A phone. Not her usual one, but something smaller, with a cheap black case. His stomach twisted. He told himself it was nothing, but his hands moved of their own accord, pulling the phone out just enough to confirm his worst fear. It wasn't her work phone either. Nathan's mind raced. Why did she need a second phone? His logical side told him not to jump to conclusions, but his gut, that primal, instinctive part of him, screamed otherwise. He slipped the phone back into her bag just as he heard her footsteps on the stairs. For the rest of the day, Nathan tried to dismiss his unease. He busied himself with work, coding software for a local firm, but the nagging thoughts wouldn't leave. He replayed every interaction with Rebecca from the past few weeks. The late nights at the office, the vague excuses, the sudden interest in her appearance. Each memory added weight to the invisible burden on his chest. That night, the first real crack formed in their marriage. As they sat down to dinner, Nathan brought up the second phone. "Rebecca, I noticed something this morning. A phone in your bag. Is it new?" She froze, her fork hovering mid-air before regaining her composure. "Oh, it's just an old one I keep for work contacts. You know how busy things have been lately?" Her answer was smooth, too smooth, and her avoidance of eye contact didn't escape him. He didn't press further, but the seed of doubt had been planted, its roots spreading through his thoughts. A week later, the doubt blossomed into something Nathan could no longer ignore. An anonymous email landed in his inbox at work. The subject line read, "Open your eyes." Attached was a blurred photo of Rebecca at a wine bar, leaning in close to a man Nathan didn't recognize. The message was short, a single sentence. "Your wife isn't who you think she is." Nathan stared at the email, his pulse pounding in his ears. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone wanted him to know. But why? And who? The questions spiraled in his mind, each one darker than the last. That evening, Nathan found himself replaying the email over and over, his mind swimming with possibilities. Could it be a prank? A misunderstanding? Or worse, was this the truth he'd been avoiding? He didn't show Rebecca the email, not yet. He needed more than an anonymous warning to confront her. He needed the truth, and he resolved to find it, no matter how painful it might be. Nathan sat on their front porch that night, the cool Charleston breeze brushing against his skin as he stared out into the quiet street. The house, once a symbol of their shared dreams, now felt like a fragile shell holding secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to uncover. But the doubt was there, persistent and unyielding, and Nathan knew there was no turning back. He would uncover the truth, whatever it was, even if it shattered the life he thought they'd built together. The anonymous email haunted Nathan, replaying in his mind like an unshakable melody. "Your wife isn't who you think she is." He had tried to dismiss it as a cruel prank, but deep down he knew better. The blurred photo of Rebecca at the wine bar with a man who wasn't him was proof enough that something was amiss. Nathan resolved to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Over the following days, Nathan's observations of Rebecca became more focused, almost clinical. She was careful, too careful, always deleting her phone messages, locking her devices, and leaving the room for phone calls. The mysterious second phone hadn't reappeared, and Rebecca's demeanor remained cool and collected. But Nathan noticed the small things, her subtle smiles at her phone, her eagerness to leave the house, and her dismissive responses when he asked where she was going. "Another late meeting?" Nathan asked one evening as Rebecca grabbed her coat. "Yes. We're finalizing the campaign, so it's all hands on deck," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Don't wait up." Her words lingered in the air long after the door clicked shut. Nathan sat in silence, the weight of doubt pressing on his chest. It wasn't just her words. It was the way she said them, clipped and rehearsed, as though she'd practiced the excuse a dozen times. For a man who built software for a living, Nathan's mind now turned to another kind of code, deciphering Rebecca's secrets. The next day, Nathan confided in his sister, Marilyn. Over coffee at her cozy downtown apartment, he laid out everything: the second phone, the email, the blurry photo. "I don't know what to think anymore," Nathan admitted, staring at the steam rising from his mug. "Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it doesn't feel right." Marilyn, ever pragmatic, leaned forward. "Nathan, you're not crazy. Trust your gut. If you think something's wrong, it probably is. But don't confront her until you know for sure." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you need proof, real proof, not just a blurry photo or your instincts." Marilyn's words echoed in Nathan's mind as he left her apartment. Proof. That's what he needed. Later that week, Nathan made a decision he never thought he'd have to make. He contacted Carla Mills, a private investigator recommended by a friend. Meeting her in her unassuming downtown office felt surreal, as if he'd stepped into a crime drama he hadn't signed up for. Carla was sharp and straightforward, with a calm demeanor that put Nathan at ease. "You're looking for answers," she said after he explained the situation. "I can help you find them, but you need to be prepared for whatever we uncover." "I just want the truth," Nathan said, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. Carla began her work immediately. Within days, she provided Nathan with a preliminary report that deepened his suspicions. Rebecca had been meeting a man named Daniel Price, a senior executive at her company during lunch breaks and after work. Their meetings weren't overtly romantic, but they were frequent enough to raise questions. Then came the discovery that shifted everything. Carla obtained footage of Rebecca and Daniel leaving a downtown hotel together late one evening. The sight of them laughing and walking side by side hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. He felt as though the ground beneath him had been ripped away, leaving him suspended in free fall. Armed with this knowledge, Nathan decided to dig deeper on his own. One evening, while Rebecca was in the shower, he accessed her work laptop, which she'd left unlocked on the kitchen counter. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. An email thread between Rebecca and Daniel confirmed their next meeting, a private dinner at a restaurant he knew well, one they used to frequent together. Nathan stared at the screen, his hands trembling. The emails were casual yet intimate, peppered with inside jokes and compliments. One line from Daniel stood out, twisting the knife even further. "Can't wait for our next getaway. You're the best part of my day." When Rebecca came downstairs that evening, smiling as if nothing were amiss, Nathan could barely look at her. The woman he had built a life with, the woman he had shared dreams with, was slipping further and further away from him, tethered to someone else. Nathan confided in Carla again, who suggested they install a GPS tracker on Rebecca's car to monitor her movements. He hesitated at first, feeling uneasy about invading her privacy, but the thought of her slipping away without answers pushed him to agree. Over the next few days, Nathan watched as Rebecca's routine became clearer. She was methodical, careful to avoid suspicion, but the GPS told a different story. Lunch hours at unfamiliar locations, evening drives that ended nowhere near the office. Each data point was another thread in the web of her deceit. One evening, Rebecca came home later than usual, her excuse flimsy and unconvincing. Nathan watched her as she moved around the kitchen, her movements so familiar yet suddenly foreign. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat across from him at the dining table, the same table where they'd shared countless meals, celebrations, and quiet moments. "Long day?" Nathan asked, his voice neutral. Rebecca nodded, taking a sip. "Exhausting." Nathan wanted to scream, to demand answers, to lay the evidence in front of her and force her to explain herself. But he held back. Not yet. Not until he had everything he needed. As Rebecca headed upstairs, Nathan remained at the table, staring at the empty glass she'd left behind. The cracks in their marriage were no longer cracks. They were gaping fractures, impossible to ignore. And Nathan knew that the truth, once revealed, would change everything. Nathan sat alone at the dining table, the weight of silence pressing down on him. The GPS tracker had confirmed his suspicions. Rebecca's late nights, her extended lunches, and her vague excuses all led to one undeniable truth. She wasn't where she said she was, and worse, she wasn't who she used to be. The fractures in their marriage, now visible and undeniable, pushed Nathan into action. He needed more than breadcrumbs. He needed the full truth. The next morning, Nathan met Carla Mills in her office. She laid out her findings. Times, locations, and photos of Rebecca and Daniel Price together. While nothing in the images was overtly incriminating, the patterns were undeniable. They had become regulars at a downtown cafe where they sat too close and laughed too freely. Carla also noted Daniel's reputation at the company. He was charming, ambitious, and known for crossing boundaries. Nathan's jaw clenched as Carla slid an audio file across her desk. "You need to hear this," she said, her voice steady but cautious. Pressing play, Nathan's stomach churned as he listened to Rebecca's voice. "I know it's risky, but I can't stop thinking about you. This weekend." She paused, her tone dropping to a whisper. "I need this, Daniel." The recording ended, leaving Nathan gripping the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was real. His wife was planning something with another man, and Nathan felt his world begin to crumble. "Where is this going?" he asked Carla, his voice low and strained. "They're planning a weekend trip," Carla replied. "I'll track the details, but it's clear this isn't just a casual friendship." Nathan left the office in a daze, his thoughts spiraling between anger, sadness, and disbelief. That evening he tried to confront Rebecca without revealing what he knew. "Rebecca," he started, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Have you ever felt unhappy with us, like something's missing?" She looked up from her laptop, startled by the question. "Nathan, what are you talking about? We're fine, aren't we?" Her deflection only confirmed his fears. Nathan didn't press further, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. Days passed, and Carla's updates became increasingly damning. Rebecca had booked a cabin at a luxury resort in Asheville, North Carolina, under a fake name. The reservation was for 2 guests. Nathan stared at the confirmation email Carla had forwarded him, his stomach twisting in knots. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Rebecca was betraying him. Nathan knew he couldn't face this alone. He reached out to Julia Price, Daniel's wife. Her voice over the phone was calm, almost dismissive, until Nathan mentioned his wife's name. "Rebecca Cole? From marketing?" Julia's tone sharpened. "Why are you bringing her up?" Nathan hesitated before replying. "Because your husband is planning a weekend trip with her." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Julia spoke, her voice trembling. "Tell me everything." They met at a quiet cafe, the air between them heavy with shared pain. Nathan laid out the evidence, emails, GPS logs, and the audio recording. Julia's face hardened with each piece of proof, her composure slipping. "I knew he was distant," she admitted, her voice breaking, "but I thought it was work. I didn't think it was this." Nathan saw the hurt in her eyes mirroring his own. For a brief moment, they weren't strangers. They were 2 people caught in the same storm, clinging to whatever truth they could find. Julia's anger ignited a resolve in Nathan. "What's your next move?" she asked. "I don't know," Nathan admitted. "But I can't just sit back and let this happen." Julia nodded. "Neither can I." Together, they devised a plan. Carla would continue tracking Rebecca and Daniel, while Julia and Nathan prepared for a confrontation. It wasn't about revenge. Nathan realized. It was about reclaiming control over a situation that had spiraled beyond his grasp. The weekend loomed closer, and Nathan found himself filled with a mix of dread and determination. He watched Rebecca pack her suitcase one evening, humming to herself as if nothing was amiss. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his tone casual but sharp enough to make her pause. "Work trip," she replied, her back to him. "You know how it is." Nathan nodded, biting back the anger rising in his throat. He knew how it was, all right, and soon Rebecca would know just how much he knew. As she zipped her suitcase and carried it to the door, Nathan felt the full weight of the moment settle on him. This wasn't just about the lies or the betrayal. It was about the life they had built together, now teetering on the edge of collapse. But Nathan wasn't about to let it crumble without a fight. The suitcase by the door haunted Nathan long after Rebecca left that evening. Her casual lie about a work trip replayed in his mind as he sat in the silence of their once happy home. He couldn't bring himself to confront her outright yet. He needed the plan to unfold perfectly. With every ticking second, the reality of her betrayal tightened around him like a vice. But Nathan wasn't alone anymore. He had an ally in Julia Price. The day after Rebecca left, Nathan met Julia again at the same quiet cafe where they had first spoken. Julia, composed yet visibly tense, arrived with a thick folder in hand. She placed it on the table between them with a thud. "What's this?" Nathan asked, his voice low. "Everything I could find on Daniel," Julia said, her voice sharper now, tinged with bitterness. "Emails, bank statements, even a few credit card receipts. He doesn't bother hiding much, apparently." Nathan sifted through the documents, his heart sinking further with each piece of evidence. Julia had uncovered enough to confirm not only Daniel's infidelity with Rebecca, but also a pattern of similar behavior in the past. He was a man who thrived on deceit, using charm to shield his darker tendencies. "This isn't just about Rebecca and Daniel, is it?" Julia asked, leaning forward. Her voice softened. "It's about you, what you're willing to accept." Nathan didn't respond immediately. He stared at the photo of Rebecca and Daniel leaving a hotel, their faces lit with smiles that felt like daggers to his heart. "I'm not willing to accept this," he said finally, his voice firm. "Not anymore." Julia nodded. "Then let's make sure they can't hide from this." Together they began crafting their plan. Carla, the private investigator, continued gathering intelligence on Rebecca and Daniel's movements. Meanwhile, Julia and Nathan discussed how they would confront the pair at the resort. It wasn't just about catching them, it was about exposing their actions and ensuring there were consequences. Nathan found unexpected strength in Julia's resolve. She wasn't just angry, she was determined to reclaim her dignity, to remind Daniel that his actions had real consequences. Her energy was infectious, giving Nathan a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. "What happens after?" Nathan asked one evening, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "After we confront them?" Julia took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "We move on, but not before making sure they can't sweep this under the rug." Nathan nodded, though the idea of moving on felt like an impossibility. How do you rebuild a life when the foundation has been shattered? He didn't have an answer yet, but he knew he had to find one. The weekend drew closer, and with it, the tension in Nathan's chest grew unbearable. Rebecca was still texting him occasionally, her messages short and nonchalant. "Work's going well," she wrote. "Miss you. See you Sunday." Nathan read the message, his jaw tightening. The audacity of her words, how easily she lied, left him breathless. He typed a brief reply, masking his fury. "Miss you too." On the night before their planned confrontation, Nathan met with Carla one final time. She handed him a small device, a discreet camera disguised as a pen. "Use this to record everything," she instructed. "You'll need proof if this goes to court." Nathan pocketed the device, his mind racing. Proof. That's what this was all about. Not just for legal reasons, but for himself. He needed to see it, to hear it, to confront the undeniable truth. The next morning, Nathan and Julia drove separately to Asheville. The scenic drive did little to calm Nathan's nerves. When they arrived at the resort, they checked into adjacent rooms, ensuring they were close enough to monitor Rebecca and Daniel's suite. Carla had already set up surveillance, her attention to detail reassuring Nathan that no moment would go unnoticed. That evening, Nathan and Julia sat together in his room, reviewing the plan one final time. "What if they deny everything?" Nathan asked, his voice betraying his lingering doubt. "They won't have the chance," Julia said firmly. "The truth will speak for itself." Nathan nodded, though a part of him still wrestled with the reality of what they were about to do. The woman he had loved for over a decade, the life they had built together. It all felt like a distant memory now, overshadowed by the weight of betrayal. When the clock struck 9 p.m., Carla sent them a text. "They're back. Let me know when you're ready." Nathan looked at Julia, who gave him a reassuring nod. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Together they stepped into the night, ready to confront the truth head-on. Nathan's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he parked outside the luxury mountain resort in Asheville. The serene surroundings, with their sweeping views of the Blue Ridge Mountains, seemed at odds with the storm brewing inside him. Carla's message confirming Rebecca and Daniel's arrival replayed in his mind. Everything was in place, yet Nathan's heart pounded with a mix of fury and sorrow. The confrontation he'd spent weeks preparing for was moments away. Earlier that day, Nathan and Julia had finalized their plan. Carla's surveillance team had tracked Rebecca and Daniel to the resort, pinpointing their suite and confirming their dinner reservations at the upscale restaurant on the property. The setup was meticulous, every detail accounted for to ensure neither of the cheaters could deny their actions. Julia, calm and collected, had a demeanor that Nathan envied. While she appeared resolved, Nathan wrestled with the weight of what was to come. Carla had sent another update hours before dinner. Rebecca and Daniel checked into the suite at 3:15 p.m. They've been inside since. Nathan sat in his room, the pen-shaped camera Carla had given him resting on the bedside table. The plan was simple. Nathan and Julia would confront Rebecca and Daniel at the restaurant in a way that left no room for escape or denial. Carla would be nearby, ready to intervene if things spiraled out of control. For Nathan, it wasn't just about exposing the affair. It was about reclaiming his dignity. The evening arrived, and Nathan prepared himself mentally. He thought of the years he had spent with Rebecca, the dreams they had shared, and the life they had built. Those memories now felt tainted, overshadowed by lies and betrayal. But even as anger swelled within him, a pang of sadness lingered. The love he once felt for Rebecca wasn't something he could erase overnight. At 7 p.m., Nathan and Julia entered the restaurant. The atmosphere was warm and elegant, with dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. Nathan's eyes scanned the room, searching for Rebecca. His stomach churned when he spotted her. She sat across from Daniel, her laughter echoing faintly across the room. She looked carefree, radiant even, as though the weight of her double life didn't exist. Nathan's grip tightened on the hidden camera in his pocket. Julia placed a hand on Nathan's arm, steadying him. "Let's stick to the plan," she whispered. Nathan nodded, taking a deep breath. Together they approached the table. "Rebecca," Nathan said, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she saw Nathan standing there. For a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then her gaze shifted to Julia, whose presence only deepened Rebecca's panic. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" Rebecca stammered, her voice trembling. "Funny," Nathan said, his tone icy. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Daniel, clearly caught off guard, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This isn't what it looks like," he began, but Julia silenced him with a sharp glare. "Save it, Daniel," Julia said, her voice laced with venom. "We've heard enough of your lies." Rebecca attempted to regain her composure. "Nathan, I can explain." "Explain?" Nathan interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Explain what? That you lied to me? That you've been sneaking around with him while pretending we still had a marriage worth saving?" Rebecca's face flushed red, her eyes darting around the room as other diners began to notice the scene unfolding. Daniel, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke up. "This isn't the place for this," Daniel said, standing. "Let's take this somewhere private." Nathan took a step closer, his gaze locked on Daniel. "Private? You mean like the suite you checked into this afternoon?" Daniel froze, his confident facade crumbling. Rebecca reached out as if to stop Nathan from saying more, but he stepped back, refusing her touch. Julia's voice cut through the tension. "I hope you enjoyed your little vacation, Daniel, because it's the last one you'll take on my dime." With that, she dropped a stack of printed emails onto the table. "Proof," she said coldly, "of everything." Rebecca looked at Nathan, tears forming in her eyes. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I wasn't thinking clearly." "No, Rebecca," Nathan said, his voice steady but filled with pain. "You knew exactly what you were doing." The confrontation ended as abruptly as it began. Rebecca and Daniel sat in stunned silence as Nathan and Julia walked away. Carla, waiting near the entrance, nodded in approval as they exited. Back in his room, Nathan felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the confrontation was over, anger at the betrayal, sadness for what had been lost. But above all, he felt a sense of closure beginning to take shape. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe. Nathan paced the floor of his room, his thoughts tangled between anger and uncertainty. The restaurant confrontation had exposed Rebecca and Daniel, but it felt unfinished, like a storm brewing just out of reach. Rebecca's tearful excuses echoed in his mind, but they rang hollow against the weight of her actions. For Nathan, this wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about reclaiming the truth of their life together. He wasn't done yet, and neither was Julia. Later that night, Carla called with an update. "They're back in their suite," she said. "I've got audio running on the devices we set up. Do you want to hear it?" Nathan hesitated but nodded, his voice cracking. "Send it over." As the recording played through his phone, Nathan's chest tightened. Rebecca and Daniel's conversation was muffled but clear enough to piece together. Daniel sounded confident, almost dismissive of the confrontation. "They'll get over it," Daniel said, his voice smug. "People like Nathan don't have the guts to follow through. He'll crawl back to her and you'll smooth it over. They always do." Nathan clenched his fists. The arrogance, the audacity, it was unbearable. Then Rebecca spoke, her tone subdued. "I don't know, Daniel," she murmured. "I've never seen Nathan like that before. He looked done. What if this doesn't blow over?" "It will," Daniel replied casually. "He's too soft to make it stick." Those words ignited something in Nathan, a fire that had been smoldering for weeks. He wasn't soft, he wasn't weak, and he wouldn't let them brush off the pain they had caused. It was time to act decisively. The next morning, Nathan and Julia coordinated their final confrontation. Carla ensured they had the evidence prepared: emails, photos, GPS logs, and audio recordings, all meticulously compiled. It wasn't just about exposing the affair now, it was about dismantling the lies entirely. At noon, Nathan and Julia approached Rebecca and Daniel's suite. Nathan knocked firmly, the sound echoing down the corridor. Inside, there was a shuffle of movement before Daniel opened the door. His confident expression faltered when he saw Nathan and Julia standing there. "What do you want?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "To finish what you started," Nathan said, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. Rebecca appeared from the bedroom, her face pale. "Nathan, please, can we just talk?" "Talk?" Nathan scoffed, holding up the folder of evidence. "Sure, Rebecca, let's talk. Let's talk about the months of lies, the sneaking around, the destruction of everything we built together." Rebecca's eyes welled up, but Nathan pressed on. "You didn't just betray me. You broke every promise, every vow, every ounce of trust I had in you. And for what? Him?" Daniel bristled. "All right, that's enough. You don't need to humiliate her like this." Julia stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Oh, Daniel, you don't get to play the hero here. Not after everything you've done." She dropped a stack of documents onto the coffee table. "Emails, hotel receipts, audio recordings, every shred of your betrayal is right here. You thought you could hide it, but the truth always comes out." Daniel's face turned red as he flipped through the papers. Rebecca sat down heavily on the couch, her hands trembling. "Rebecca," Nathan said, his voice softer now but still firm. "I loved you. I gave you everything I had. And this is how you repay me?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Rebecca whispered, her tears finally falling. "It just happened. I wasn't happy, Nathan. I felt invisible." "Invisible?" Nathan's voice cracked. "Rebecca, I built my life around you. I supported you through everything, and instead of talking to me, you chose to destroy us. Daniel, sensing the conversation slipping out of his control, interjected. "This isn't productive. Let's just—" "Shut up, Daniel," Nathan snapped, his tone cutting. "You don't get to dictate how this goes." Julia added, her voice cold, "And don't think for a second you'll get away unscathed. I've already filed for divorce. Everything you've worked for, it's gone." Rebecca looked at Nathan, her expression pleading. "Nathan, please, I'll do anything to fix this. Just give me a chance." Nathan stared at her, his heart heavy with the weight of everything they'd been through. But the words he needed to say were already forming. "It's too late, Rebecca. Some things can't be undone." He turned to leave, but before he stepped out, he faced Daniel one last time. "You're not half the man you think you are. And one day you'll realize that destroying other people's lives doesn't make you powerful. It makes you pathetic." With that, Nathan and Julia walked out, leaving Rebecca and Daniel behind to face the wreckage of their choices. For Nathan, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming his life and finding the strength to move forward. Nathan left the resort with a mix of emotions swirling in his chest: anger, heartbreak, and a small, fragile sense of relief. The confrontation had given him the closure he craved, but it also left behind a hollow ache. Rebecca's tearful pleas and Daniel's smug dismissal still echoed in his mind as he drove back to Charleston. Beside him, Julia sat silently, her own thoughts mirrored in her tight grip on the evidence folder. "You did the right thing," she said finally, breaking the silence. "It's hard, but now you can start moving forward." Nathan nodded, though the path ahead felt more like a steep climb than a clear road. "What about you?" he asked. Julia glanced out the window, her jaw set. "I'm done with him. The divorce papers are already in motion. Now it's just about making sure he doesn't walk away unscathed." When Nathan arrived home, the reality of his new life began to sink in. Rebecca's things were still scattered throughout the house, their presence a haunting reminder of what had been lost. The dining table where they had shared countless meals now felt like a monument to their broken promises. Nathan didn't cry. He had done enough of that over the past few weeks, but the weight of it all pressed down on him. The following day, Nathan met with his lawyer to finalize the divorce proceedings. The evidence Carla had gathered was more than enough to prove Rebecca's infidelity, giving Nathan the upper hand in negotiations. His lawyer, a pragmatic but empathetic woman named Diane, assured him the process would be swift. "Infidelity cases like this don't leave much room for argument," Diane explained. "You'll get the house and the financial settlement will work in your favor." Nathan nodded, though the victory felt hollow. The house, once a symbol of their shared dreams, now felt like an empty shell. Rebecca, meanwhile, faced her own fallout. Word of the affair had spread quickly, thanks in part to Julia's strategic sharing of evidence with key figures at their company. Daniel was demoted, his reputation irreparably damaged. Rebecca, too, found herself ostracized by her colleagues, her once promising career now on shaky ground. The weight of her choices bore down on her, and the life she had built began to crumble. A week after the confrontation, Rebecca showed up at Nathan's doorstep. She looked different, tired, disheveled, and carrying a small box of personal belongings. "Nathan," she said softly, her voice thick with regret. "Can we talk?" Nathan stepped outside, closing the door behind him. He wasn't ready to let her back into his space, not after everything. "What do you want, Rebecca?" She hesitated, her eyes glistening. I need you to know how sorry I am. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try to make things right." Nathan crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Make things right? Rebecca, there's no going back. What you did, it broke us. You didn't just betray me. You destroyed the trust we built over 10 years. "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking, "and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I still love you, Nathan. Can't we at least try?" Nathan looked at her, his emotions swirling. Part of him wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that they could rebuild, but the wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. "I can't do this, Rebecca. Not anymore. Maybe one day I'll forgive you, but I'll never forget, and I can't live like that." Rebecca nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry." As she walked away, Nathan felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. This was the end of their chapter, but the beginning of something new, something he could build on his own. In the weeks that followed, Nathan focused on rebuilding his life. He joined a local support group for people dealing with infidelity, finding solace in their shared experiences. Slowly but surely, he began to heal. He reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies he had abandoned, and even considered moving to a smaller house, a fresh start untainted by the memories of Rebecca. Rebecca, meanwhile, faced the consequences of her actions. Her career stalled, her social circle dwindled, and Daniel, no longer the charming confidant, had retreated entirely. She was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had shattered, her regret a constant shadow. For Nathan, the journey wasn't easy, but each day brought a little more clarity, a little more strength. He knew the scars of Rebecca's betrayal would always remain, but they no longer defined him. He was more than her mistakes. He was his own person, ready to face whatever came next. As Nathan began the slow process of rebuilding his life, Rebecca was forced to confront the fallout of her choices. What had once seemed like a thrilling escape, a spark to reignite something she thought she'd lost, had now become a spiraling descent into regret and isolation. The walls she had built around herself, fortified by lies and fleeting moments with Daniel, were crumbling under the weight of her actions. Her professional life, once a pillar of stability, was now a source of constant tension. The evidence of her affair had reached the upper echelons of her company, thanks in part to Julia's deliberate exposure. Daniel's demotion was swift and public, but Rebecca's position as a marketing director became tenuous. Meetings were colder, colleagues avoided her in the halls, and whispers followed her wherever she went. "Rebecca," her boss Helen said during a tense meeting one morning, "we're reviewing the situation. Your position here is under scrutiny. Personal matters aside, this kind of publicity isn't good for the company." Rebecca nodded, swallowing her pride. She left the meeting with her hands trembling, her mind racing with the realization that her once promising career could soon be over. At home, the silence was unbearable. The house she and Nathan had shared felt suffocating without his presence. Every room held memories of the life they had built together, a life she had dismantled. She often sat in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Nathan used to sit, wondering how things had gone so wrong. Daniel, the man who had promised excitement and freedom, was nowhere to be found. After the confrontation at the resort, he had distanced himself from Rebecca, claiming he needed time to sort things out. His absence stung, but it also laid bare a painful truth. Daniel had never truly cared for her. She had been a convenience, a distraction, not the partner he had once pretended she was. One evening, unable to endure the loneliness any longer, Rebecca called Daniel. The phone rang twice before he answered, his tone sharp and impatient. "Rebecca," he said, sighing, "what do you want?" I wanted to talk," she said softly. "About everything, about us." "There is no us, Rebecca," Daniel snapped. "Whatever this was, it's over. I've got too much to deal with already. I suggest you figure out your own mess." The line went dead, leaving Rebecca staring at the phone in disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She had no one to blame but herself. The excitement she had chased had led her to a dead end. Desperate for a sense of purpose, Rebecca began volunteering at a local women's shelter. At first, it was a distraction, a way to fill the empty hours. But over time, it became something more. Listening to the stories of women who had overcome hardships, who had rebuilt their lives from nothing, gave Rebecca a glimmer of hope. One afternoon, while organizing donated clothes, an older woman named Gloria approached her. "You look like someone carrying a heavy burden," Gloria said gently. Rebecca hesitated before nodding. "I've made mistakes. Big ones." "Haven't we all?" Gloria said with a knowing smile. "The question is, what are you going to do about them?" That night, Rebecca sat down at her kitchen table with a pen and paper. She began writing letters, to Nathan, to Julia, even to herself. In her letter to Nathan, she poured out her heart, not to beg for forgiveness, but to take responsibility. "Nathan, I know I can't undo the pain I've caused. I made choices that destroyed something beautiful, and for that, I'll carry regret for the rest of my life. You deserved better. I hope one day you find happiness again, even if it's without me." The letter didn't bring instant relief, but it was a start. For the first time in weeks, Rebecca felt a flicker of peace. The road ahead was long, and she wasn't sure where it would lead, but she was determined to face it step by step. The weeks following Rebecca's departure were both a blur and a crucible for Nathan. The wounds of betrayal were still raw, but each passing day brought a small measure of clarity. He threw himself into rebuilding his life with an almost mechanical determination, each task serving as a step away from the broken past and toward an uncertain future. Nathan began by reclaiming his home. The memories of Rebecca lingered in every room, from the photos on the mantel to the faint scent of her perfume that clung to the bedroom. One weekend, with the help of Marilyn, he boxed up everything that reminded him of her and placed it in the garage. The house, once a shared sanctuary, began to feel like his own again. "You're making progress," Marilyn said, handing him a glass of iced tea as they surveyed the now cleared living room. "I know it doesn't feel like it yet, but you're stronger than you think." Nathan offered her a faint smile. I hate that it ended this way. It's like everything we built together was a lie." "It wasn't a lie," Marilyn said firmly. "It just changed. And now so will you." Her words stuck with him as he moved through the following weeks. He joined a local hiking group, something he had always wanted to do but never made time for. The fresh air and the physical exertion provided an outlet for his pent-up emotions, and the camaraderie of the group offered a sense of connection he hadn't realized he was missing. One Saturday, during a particularly challenging hike, Nathan found himself walking alongside a woman named Claire. She was around his age, with a kind smile and an easy laugh. They struck up a conversation, initially about the trail, but eventually about life. "I'm here because I needed a change," Claire admitted as they reached the summit. "Sometimes the only way to move forward is to start fresh." Nathan nodded, the weight of her words resonating with him. "I know what you mean. Starting over isn't easy, but it feels necessary." As they descended the trail, Nathan felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in months: hope. Meanwhile, Nathan continued his sessions with the support group. The stories he heard there, of people who had endured and overcome betrayal, were both heartbreaking and inspiring. Slowly, he began to share his own story, finding solace in the understanding nods and empathetic words of his fellow group members. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," one member said during a session. "It means freeing yourself from the hold they have over you. You're not forgiving them for their sake, you're doing it for yours." Nathan took those words to heart. He wasn't ready to forgive Rebecca, not fully, but he could see the value in releasing the anger that tethered him to the pain. Each step he took toward healing was a step away from the bitterness that threatened to consume him. One evening, Nathan received an unexpected letter. The envelope was plain, the handwriting familiar. It was from Rebecca. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he was ready to face whatever she had to say. The letter was heartfelt, filled with apologies and reflections on her mistakes. She didn't ask for forgiveness, but expressed her hope that Nathan could find peace and happiness again. Reading her words, Nathan felt a surge of conflicting emotions: sadness, anger, and a faint glimmer of closure. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't the resolution he wanted, but it was a step toward letting go. In the months that followed, Nathan's life began to take shape in new and unexpected ways. He reconnected with old friends, traveled to places he had always dreamed of visiting, and deepened his bond with his sister, who had been his rock through the chaos. Claire, too, became a part of his journey. What started as casual conversations on the trails grew into something more. She was patient and understanding, never pushing him to move faster than he was ready for. With her, Nathan felt the beginnings of something he thought he had lost, a connection built on trust and respect. One evening, as Nathan stood on his back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he realized he felt lighter. The pain of Rebecca's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined him. He had survived, grown, and found new reasons to smile. Healing wasn't a straight path, he realized, but it was a journey worth taking. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt ready to embrace whatever came next. Nathan sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. The letter from Rebecca still rested in the drawer where he had placed it weeks ago. But the emotions it stirred hadn't entirely settled. He had moved forward in many ways, yet the threads of their shared past still lingered in the corners of his mind. He was learning to let go, but healing didn't erase the memories. It merely dulled their sharp edges. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Rebecca appeared at his doorstep. Nathan opened the door, surprised to see her standing there, her eyes heavy with exhaustion and something else he couldn't quite place. She held a thin envelope in one hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "Nathan," she began, her voice fragile. "Can we talk, please?" He hesitated, glancing at the clock. Part of him wanted to turn her away, to shield himself from the turmoil she always seemed to bring. But another part, the one that still remembered the woman he once loved, nodded. "Come in." Rebecca stepped inside, her gaze darting around the house as though searching for remnants of the life they had shared. The absence of her belongings was striking, a stark reminder of how much had changed. She sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I needed to come. I needed to say this in person." Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression guarded. "I'm listening." Rebecca took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've been thinking about everything. About what I did, about us. And I know there's no excuse for the choices I made. I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting her continue. "I've lost so much because of my mistakes," she admitted, her voice breaking. "But losing you, that's the thing I can't bear. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. I want to fix this, Nathan. I want to fix us." The room fell into a heavy silence, her words hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Nathan stared at her, his emotions churning. Part of him wanted to believe her, to give in to the hope she offered. But the scars of her betrayal ran deep, and he wasn't sure if they could ever truly heal. "Rebecca," he said finally, his voice steady but filled with pain. "I loved you more than anything, and what you did, it broke something in me. In us. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice over and over again, a choice that told me I wasn't enough for you." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks, but she didn't look away. "I was selfish," she said. "I let my insecurities, my fears control me, and I threw away the best thing in my life. But I see it now, Nathan. I see what I lost, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Nathan shook his head, a bittersweet smile playing on his lips. "It's not that simple. Trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. And honestly, I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Rebecca's shoulders sagged, her hope dimming. "So, that's it? We're just done?" Nathan's gaze softened, but his resolve remained firm. "I don't know what the future holds," he said quietly, "but right now I need to focus on myself, on moving forward. Maybe one day we can find a way to be something. But not now, not like this." Rebecca nodded slowly, her tears falling freely. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "I'm sorry, Nathan. For everything." "I know," he said, his voice filled with both sadness and finality. "And I hope you find peace, Rebecca. I really do." She stood and walked to the door, pausing for a moment as though waiting for him to call her back. But Nathan remained seated, watching as she stepped out into the world they no longer shared. For the first time, Nathan felt the weight of her absence not as a loss, but as a space he could finally fill with something new. The days following Rebecca's final visit left Nathan with a strange sense of clarity. While her plea for reconciliation had stirred old emotions, it also solidified his resolve to move forward. Rebecca's actions had consequences, not just for their relationship, but for her life as a whole. And now, justice for those actions was beginning to take shape, not out of revenge, but as a necessary step toward accountability. Nathan's lawyer, Diane, called him early one morning with an update. "We're ready to proceed with the settlement negotiations," she said. "Given the evidence, it's unlikely she'll contest the terms. You'll get the house and we'll ensure the financial division reflects the circumstances." Nathan sighed, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. "I don't want to destroy her, Diane," he said quietly. "I just want closure." "You're being fair," Diane reassured him. "But fairness doesn't mean letting her off the hook. It means ensuring you both walk away with what's deserved." That same week, Julia's divorce from Daniel reached its conclusion as well. Unlike Nathan, Julia harbored no hesitation about ensuring Daniel faced the full brunt of his actions. Her lawyer had filed for divorce with infidelity as the primary cause, using the evidence Nathan and Carla had gathered. Julia called Nathan after the final court hearing, her voice tinged with both triumph and exhaustion. "It's done," she said. "He tried to argue for leniency, but the judge wasn't having it. I kept the house and he's out of the company." "That's good to hear," Nathan replied. "You deserved better." "So did you," Julia said, her tone softening. "But I think we both know better things are coming." Meanwhile, Daniel's professional and personal downfall became a topic of quiet gossip in their shared circles. His demotion within the company had been swift and his reputation tarnished. Colleagues who once admired his charm now avoided him, aware of the duplicity that had unraveled his career. He had lost Julia, his standing in the company, and the respect of nearly everyone around him. Rebecca, too, faced her reckoning. The fallout from her affair with Daniel had seeped into every corner of her life. She had resigned from her job to avoid termination, and her once comfortable social life had evaporated. Friends she thought she could rely on now kept their distance, wary of being associated with the scandal. Yet amidst the chaos, Rebecca began to find moments of self-reflection. Volunteering at the women's shelter had become a cornerstone of her routine, offering her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Slowly, she started piecing her life back together, not for Nathan or anyone else, but for herself. As Nathan watched these events unfold, he found himself less consumed by anger and more focused on his own growth. His life was no longer defined by Rebecca's betrayal or the pain it had caused. Instead, it was filled with new beginnings. His hikes with Claire, the camaraderie of his support group, and the satisfaction of rediscovering his independence. One day, as Nathan sat on his back porch with Marilyn, sipping coffee and enjoying the crisp autumn air, she turned to him with a knowing smile. "You've come a long way," she said. "I'm proud of you." Nathan smiled back, the weight in his chest feeling lighter than it had in months. "I feel free," he admitted. "It's not perfect, but it's better. And for the first time, I'm excited about what's ahead." Justice, Nathan realized, wasn't just about Rebecca and Daniel facing the consequences of their actions. It was about him reclaiming his life and finding peace on his own terms. The road had been long and painful, but it had also been transformative. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nathan allowed himself a moment of quiet gratitude. He had survived the storm, and now he was ready to embrace the calm. The brisk scent of pine and earth filled Nathan's lungs as he stood at the trailhead of the Appalachian Mountains, his gear strapped securely to his back. It had been months since the chaos of his old life had unraveled, and he now stood at the edge of something he never thought he'd feel again: freedom. The scars of betrayal still lingered, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they had become markers of his growth, a reminder of where he had been and how far he had come. It wasn't just the hiking that had become a symbol of Nathan's transformation. He had embraced a new life filled with opportunities he once overlooked. His job, which had felt like an afterthought during his marriage, had become a source of purpose. His promotion to project manager came with not just a pay raise but a sense of fulfillment. He poured his energy into each project, finding satisfaction in accomplishments that were entirely his own. Nathan's relationship with Claire had grown naturally, blossoming from friendship into something deeper. She had been a constant presence during his journey, her patience and understanding a steadying force. They didn't rush things, choosing instead to focus on the small joys of getting to know each other. They hiked together often, their conversations meandering between lighthearted banter and deeper reflections. "You've got this sparkle now," Claire said one evening as they sat by a campfire after a long day on the trail. It's like you found yourself again." Nathan smiled, staring at the flickering flames. "Maybe I have, or maybe I'm still finding myself. Either way, it feels good." Back in Charleston, Nathan continued to build the life he wanted. He moved into a smaller, cozier house that felt like a fresh slate. The empty spaces in the home weren't filled with regret, but with possibility. Marilyn helped him decorate, their laughter echoing as they painted walls and hung pictures. "You're creating a new chapter," Marilyn said, stepping back to admire their work. "And it suits you." Nathan also deepened his involvement in the community. He volunteered with a local mentorship program, guiding young professionals navigating the early stages of their careers. Sharing his experiences with them brought a sense of purpose and joy, reminding him that his journey could inspire others. One afternoon, Nathan received an invitation to a gallery opening hosted by Julia. Her divorce from Daniel had been finalized, and she had thrown herself into her art with renewed vigor. The gallery showcased her latest collection, a series of abstract paintings that explored themes of resilience and renewal. "Each piece is a chapter of my story," Julia explained when Nathan arrived. "But they're also about moving forward, about finding beauty in the aftermath." Nathan nodded, understanding her sentiment deeply. As he wandered through the gallery, he felt a profound sense of connection, not just to Julia's art, but to his own journey of healing. Rebecca, too, had begun to find her footing. The women's shelter where she volunteered became a lifeline, a place where she could channel her energy into helping others. She had moved out of Charleston, seeking a fresh start in a quieter town. Though she and Nathan no longer spoke, he occasionally heard updates through mutual acquaintances. He wished her well, but her chapter in his life was firmly closed. On the anniversary of his divorce being finalized, Nathan stood once again on his back porch, the golden light of sunset bathing the world in warmth. He thought back to the man he had been a year ago, broken, uncertain, and weighed down by anger. That man felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone stronger and more self-assured. Claire joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," Nathan replied with a small smile. "How far I've come. How much there is to look forward to." She leaned against him, her presence grounding him. "The best is still ahead, you know." "I think you're right," he said, his voice steady and full of hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan let out a deep breath. This was a new beginning, a life shaped not by the pain of the past, but by the endless possibilities of the future. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt ready to embrace it all. Rebecca's choices highlight the importance of honesty and self-awareness, while Nathan's path emphasizes the value of self-respect and perseverance. Forgiveness, though not always reconciliation, can set us free, allowing us to heal and embrace new opportunities. What do you think about Nathan's decision to prioritize his own well-being over rekindling his relationship? Have you ever faced a situation where letting go was the only way forward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. Also, tell us where you're watching this from. Are you tuning in from the heart of a big city or a quiet corner of the countryside? We're always excited to connect with our viewers from around the globe. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more compelling tales like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. That way you won't miss the next journey of resilience, redemption, and hope. Thank you for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next story.